And there we go. We're in. How you doing, Joel?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here, Ryan.
Thank you very much for coming. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for coming to Southern California. It's great to finally meet you.
Yeah. This has been really good. It's been fun to kind of make a purpose trip to come out to California, and my brother lives out here as well, so
Yeah.
got to have two birds with one stone and sunny California.
How's the Orange County life treating you?
Well, it's totally different than LA. Oh my goodness, like it is just urban sprawl up here, and you get
Really? Is it tough up here?
well, I don't know that I could live in the concrete jungle all the time. But I also wouldn't want to live in the OC. Like that's way too posh, too bougie.
It is pretty posh out there, but it's so quiet.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, and green and all the canyons and the mountains. Yeah, I'm much more drawn to the nature, I think.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is a good place to be for now. I don't know if I'm gonna completely stay here. I haven't really. But if you want to meet people and you want people to come to you, this is definitely a good place to be.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like in my 4 decades of life plus here in around the world, I've spent more time in LA than I think I probably have almost any other metropolitan area, just by chance, by accident. Like family's out here. I ended up with work occasionally, and so it's just kind of been odd to find myself back in LA on multiple occasions.
You can't escape it.
Sichuan.
But you were mentioning you're originally from Kansas City.
Yeah, Kansas City, born and raised, Midwest, Ted Lasso territory.
Ted Lasso territory. Fuck, what a legend.
Yeah.
But so what was it like growing up in the Midwest?
It's very American Midwest, really. It's corn-fed and cattle-raised kind of country. It's middle of nowhere. I was in Kansas City, so it's a big metro area. But I loved it. I loved growing up there. My folks are still there. It's currently where I'm kind of rebounded to recently.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that later. But I love growing up there. It's a really good family-friendly kind of place. It's super safe. Not super exciting in terms of world destinations, but Kansas City in the last 2 decades, even since I've left, has really blossomed, and it's really become this really cool destination with arts and culture and music and jazz and the best food. Oh my goodness, barbecue! I'm not even a barbecue fan, and they have really good barbecue.
It's funny, most people, a lot of people listening to this podcast, they're not from the United States, right? So they know that whole middle part of the United States they don't necessarily get, right? There's New York, maybe Miami, and then LA, San Francisco, and then that stuff in the middle is all a bit confusing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, for sure. So
unless some tech billionaire has made it famous for some reason.
Yeah.
But no, it's good. And so where'd you did you go to school there?
So all my primary and high school was all in Kansas City, and then I ended up doing my undergrad outside of Chicago.
Okay.
I went to a private small Christian liberal arts school on the western suburbs, and ended up graduating from there. And as soon as I was out, I just flew the nest, and I ended up moving to France. I did a year of a teaching assistant role over there, and just loved being overseas. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to get out of America now. Forever.
Yeah, well, that's pretty interesting because I had a very similar feeling. So I went to the University of Toronto.
Yeah.
And then right when I graduated, I moved to China.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Just needed to find myself somewhere else.
Yeah. What drew you to China?
Well, I was going to ask you actually, what drew you to France? Did you take any classes that did you take a class in university that led you to go into France? Because that's what happened to me. I took a class in China about China when I was at the University of Toronto. And then I was like, oh, this place is interesting. But I couldn't really act on it because I was playing basketball for the University of Toronto and I had no time and no energy. And then I took another class on China. And then when I graduated, finally, I was like, well, I got to go check out China. And then that was it. I went and I was just like, yeah, this is going to be my place for the next little while. And then I was 18 years.
18 years, man. Yeah. That's in the same country. I've done 20 years abroad, but it's been multiple places.
Yeah, I mean, I've been abroad from 2001 when I went to China until December of 2023. So, and that was basically Shanghai, China, and then after that, Dubai. And I was mostly in Dubai because of COVID. Yeah, because they stayed open and they didn't really care, and it just felt like a decent place to be. But
yeah.
Anyways, I also lived in Dubai for a bit before COVID, just because it was such a nice global hub.
Yeah, Dubai it's the Vegas of the desert, really. It's, the Middle East.
That's the thing though. Everyone who goes there is trying to have the best weekend of their life, and that does get really fucking annoying. So it's kind of Yeah, obviously Vegas is different because you can live way off the strip and never visit the strip. But living in Dubai, it's like living on the Vegas Strip all the time, and it's too much. Yeah.
My visits to Dubai, I actually went for a study program. I had like a cohort with an international group of people, and I ended up there for I think a week, and it was just I spent more money in a week in Dubai than I did probably in a whole month in Iraq. I mean, it was just like
that's how they do it. That's how they do it. They just try to make it as exciting as possible for everyone all the time. So what took you to France? Like, why France? Why not Spain? Why not Italy?
Well, I actually ended up studying French when I was in high school, and then majored in it in college.
Well, that's very Canadian of you.
I know, right? My grandmother was Canadian, so I got a little bit of heritage in me. There's a little bit of A in me,
Yeah, we all study French. We all have to study French. Yeah, and then we all never use it, and then we all forget it.
And you all forget it, yeah. So I really liked it. I just stuck with it, and I found languages were kind of easy. They came to me naturally. I was very musical. I played piano, I sang, I taught myself guitar. And so I just kind of had an ear for sound and rhythm and everything. And so I think that made language just kind of, I don't know if it's ever easy, but like there's just, I adapted to it really well. And so French was just the language of choice that kind of came at me and stuck with it, and then ended up moving there after I graduated. And I'm like, all right, let's go live in France for a while. And
I tell you, musically inclined people pick up languages so much faster. It's I remember when I was first learning Chinese, this was like back in like 2002, 2003. I was in a group, there was like 5 or 6 of us, and I was in a group with like 4 other musicians and me. And they were like a jazz band, right? And that was great for them, but they picked up Chinese like 4 times faster than I did because they just picked up the tones and they just picked up the words. And I tell you, it has a lot to do with musical training. It's very similar, I think.
Yeah, well, tonal languages like Chinese, Mandarin, the Southeast Asian languages, those, I find those difficult because of the tones. And I don't know, I don't know, maybe I'm just not musical enough, but, but yeah, definitely like, I think people who have that musical advantage, will find languages on varying degrees a lot easier to pick up.
That's great though. So you were living in Kansas City and you studied French.
Yeah. And then ended up living there for a year after college. Did a teaching assistantship program over there, kind of a TA position for a year.
Which city in France were you in? Because that makes the whole story, doesn't it?
I know, right? I was in Lille. I was just south of Lille in the north. So it was kind of the depressed, like gray and gloomy, coal mining country in the north of France. It wasn't the most attractive region to live in, but I found the people were genuinely really warm. Like they were very inviting and welcoming and friendly, more so than the South, where I did study abroad when I was in college. And the South were like outwardly like really welcoming, but just kind of closed off once you tried to like form a friendship. But I found the people in the North were, it was colder weather, but warmer hearts, basically, is the kind of saying.
That's a nice way to put it. Yeah. And then what did you do after that TA bit for a year?
Where did I end up? I think I ended up kind of rebounding back to Chicago for a year before I kind of dossed about there for a bit, before I ended up then moving to the UK.
Oh.
And I was in the UK it was a total of 12 years, but I started off with a 2-year contract at an outdoor activity center. And so I was actually moved over doing like outdoor sports management and working with a whole bunch of, volunteers and international volunteers actually who were running a climbing center, climbing wall, like a low ropes course, kind of adventure sports kind of stuff.
I love that stuff.
Yeah. And it was super, super fun. And it kind of helped redefine me and reshape me in a lot of ways, because I've never seen myself as being very athletic, but sort of through that experience, I actually realized that I am.
No way you grew up in the Midwest. You didn't play American football. You didn't play soccer. You didn't play basketball. You didn't play baseball.
No, none of it. I was
really?
Yeah, I was a total like art, theater, music geek in school growing up, and I just didn't have that image of myself of like being a sports person or being athletic. And it wasn't until I really found myself then having to, because I worked at summer camps. That's kind of how I landed this job. I was like, I'd been a camp counselor here in the States, and I ended up kind of picking up this job in the UK that was very similar in nature, but threw me really over the edge of the climbing tower. And I had like right away learned how to do ropes courses and be way more athletic than I thought I was. But I just grew into it and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So 7 years and naturalized as a citizen at the end. I ended up staying, got a British passport and the whole lot.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. How do you get a British passport in 7 years?
So you can naturalize as a British citizen in 5 years, provided you are there on a work permit, you're gainfully employed. There's certain conditions.
You got to pay tax.
Yeah. So basically, pay rent, pay, all that kind of stuff. So, and then after 5 years, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain. And you have to really hold that for a year before you then can apply for citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
So all said, it does take about 7 years from the time you land until the time you have your passport in hand. But yeah, on paper, on the books, legally, it's a 5-year process. But then there's all the waiting time and the kind of faff in between. But it was great. It was such an amazing opportunity to, be a dual citizen. In fact, when I naturalized, so I actually naturalized in the UK on the 5th of July in 2012. So the 4th of July, of course, American Independence Day, right? So here I am, this American in the UK, 4th of July. And the very next day, I go to the county council in Worcestershire, where I was living in the UK, and swore in as a British citizen.
That's a nice juxtaposition of days, right? It's like, first I'm going to celebrate my war of independence against you. And then you're going to give me a passport.
Yeah, I'm just going to, revert back,
The people in the Boston Tea Party would be so disappointed in me right now.
Man, right? I bet those sons and daughters of the American Revolution are rolling over their graves right now.
Yeah. Why are they going back to live in the UK, in England? We gave you freedom. We fought and died for your freedom so that you could go back and live under the king.
I know, right? Yeah, but I loved it. It was just, there's just something about it that drew me. And
are your parents from Europe, or from that part of the world? Where's your heritage originally? I'm curious because my family comes from Scotland and Ireland and stuff like that, and Italy a little bit. So
yeah,
because all white people in North America are from somewhere else. So yeah, where's that heritage?
Yeah, pretty much the same. So my dad's side is all Irish, Scottish and English. I'm Scottish and English. And my mom's side were all Northern Germany, Denmark, Norway, Northern European. We're just white.
Interesting.
Yeah.
My grandfather on my dad's side was actually born in London, England, before he came over to Canada. And my brother ended up doing 7 or 8 years in the UK at one stage, just based on because you can get an ancestral visa.
Yes.
If one of your family members was born in the UK. So he got one of those and was able to go and work and do all kinds of stuff right after college, I think. So it worked out really well for him.
Yeah.
But he came back to Canada after a while. After Brexit, actually, that really fucked him off.
Oh, man, Brexit drove me mad.
Yeah.
I was just what are we doing? I naturalized as a citizen, sort of better access to all of Europe, and then you're just going to deny me that right away? What is this? What do you...
I was watching this video on YouTube, and it was done, the Financial Times, the newspaper, obviously, in the UK, which you would probably know very well. They were doing this investigation on British businesses and how Brexit has affected them and stuff like that. And it was just why did we give up access to the massive European market? The people in Brussels were not that annoying. Now we need all these extra permits, and we need to have a branch office in Europe so that we can sell into Europe, because they sell this certain thing that you need to have a presence in Europe in order to, and these people were just losing their fucking minds, and no one could understand why the UK exited, Brexit. And then look at what they've done since then, right? It's just been a total mess. They didn't become the Singapore on the Thames or lower taxes or become an economic miracle. They've just been muddling on.
I know. It's just been, it's driven me absolutely crazy. And I remember actually when the sort of referendum for Brexit was happening, and I was in the UK at the time, and so I was able to vote. And I remember getting a flyer through my front door, and I was just so annoyed because it was this flyer that had an image. It was a map of Europe, and it had the UK in green, and it had Europe, the rest of Europe, in sort of a red pink color.
Mm-hmm.
And then it had in the very bottom corner, it had Turkey, and then the Middle East, all in bright red, warning,
They're coming for you.
Right? Yeah. And it was this whole the whole propaganda of it was, if you don't, if you vote to stay in the EU,
mm-hmm.
then we're going to be flooded with all the Muslim terrorists, was basically the propaganda message there. And I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
I was like, oh my goodness. Having lived in the Middle East for 7 years now, and having worked with, refugees and migrants. Like I have such a different perspective on that. And even before I worked there, like I just had a much more of an empathy for it. And it's just not the narrative I want people to have.
Fear and racism still goes a long way in politics.
I don't know where we ever need to solve that one, but
oh, we got until November this year to watch it all play out again on this side of the ocean. It's gonna be pretty pathetic, I think.
And yeah, I don't know. I don't even know what to think about most of it, to be honest.
It's time to leave again,
man. And I mean, that's the frustrating thing is like a part of me is like, oh yeah, like let's get out while I can. But at the same time, like I feel kind of a compulsion, a responsibility to like stay and kind of help fix what I think is wrong, like throw my voice into it. And I think that's always the dilemma is like, how much do you stay and you know, get involved and put your voice behind things that you want to see happen? And how much do you just say, you know what, like there's a big broad world out there and I've got the opportunity to go and explore it. And maybe I can like have a better voice by being somewhere else.
I think people like us who love to travel and who have lived abroad can probably do more for the North American collective identity by being nice people abroad than being in the US or Canada and getting involved in domestic politics, which I think is absolutely the lowest of the low.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not too far off from that. I mean, I really think there's something to be said about being a goodwill ambassador for your culture abroad, you know, because it's just all you see is what's in the media, what you see in the news. And, you know, I had that same perspective when I moved to Iraq. Because, you know, all you see in the news is, you know, terrorism and war and all this sort of tragedy. But, you know, the news is true, you know, but it's only 1% of reality. Like,
maybe less.
Right? Yeah. You know, and so I ended up moving over to Iraq in 2016 and ISIS was still active in the country. But, you know, I was there and there were, you know, folks taking their kids to school and going to the supermarket to buy milk and visiting grandma and going to the soccer match. And it was all the sort of normal things that you would do in an everyday life. It just happened to be in a country that had such bad press. And, you know, I think conversely, the same thing applies here in the States. Like our press, by the same logic, you'd never want to move to the States because of gun violence and protests and, you know, politics and all these sorts of things that you see.
Well, somehow I moved here.
I know, right? Sucker.
I'm on the next plane out now. No, it's true. It's true. I mean, like people, but don't forget too, like, I think, you know, when you push fear on people in the media, you know, you get obviously more people reading your articles. And then of course you propagate to a certain political stance. And then also too, the fear makes you greenlight certain things that go through Congress that you wouldn't raise an eyebrow at. Like, you know, oh, we're sending another $50 billion worth of whatever to Iraq to rebuild something. Look how dangerous it still is. If we don't do this, no one will. And then next, you know, it's the military industrial complex and then billions of dollars in every direction except America. That's the funny thing. Like when you live in the United States, and this is the first time I've lived here for so long, for just a couple months actually, is you start to realize like how little amount of money is spent, how a small amount of the tax dollars that Americans pay is actually spent on them in America. I mean, the majority of it seems to be just going everywhere else.
Well, and it's interesting as well, like how those pots are allocated, because I've read an article from, I think it was the former defense secretary. And, you know, there's a lot of money that goes elsewhere, but a lot of that is into the, like you said, the military complex, you know, that industrial. So a lot of it goes there. And I've heard, what is his name? Anthony Blinken, I think was his name. And he was the defense secretary under Trump. And he says, if you don't fully fund the State Department, meaning like goodwill ambassador kind of programs, Peace Corps, you know, development work, aid, foreign aid, basically, if you don't fully fund the State Department, then I'm going to need more guns.
Really?
Yeah. And I think it's something like 90-10 percentage split. Like 90% of that like foreign allocated budget goes to defense and only 10% goes to actual foreign aid and helping infrastructure and rebuild. And if you could inverse those two figures, like one, we'd have a far better world because people would have access to resources that they really needed. And you wouldn't have to worry so much about defense all the time because you're actually helping people rather than just trying to build more walls.
It's amazing. It's like the math that goes into if you start like really pulling apart the math and trying to figure out like what's going on in the defense industry, nothing makes sense. Like, so in the news recently, we all saw like Iran sent 1,000 drones and missiles at Israel, right? So absolutely ridiculous. But apparently, like, that attack cost Iran $3 million. So someone broke it down, right? They're like, okay, we know these missiles are pretty old.
Yeah.
We know these drones, they're also pretty old. They sent all this stuff at Israel. Israel shot all of them down. There was like no damage to Israel. Yeah. But Israel spent, because it's a U.S. military Iron Dome or whatever to defend Israel from outside attack. So Iran sent $3 million worth of shit at Israel, and Israel spent $1.5 billion defending themselves in the same event. So when you think about those numbers, like, it's not like, I don't know how Israel could continue defending themselves at that cost, right? Like, and someone was just talking about like how effective throwing garbage drones in the air and sending them at people are, because all of a sudden now, like, defense is getting, like, the defense industry, these really cheap alternatives are popping out, and they're just making the billions that have been spent in the past seem just insane.
That's just unreal.
Yeah. $1.5 billion to defend a $3 million attack.
That is.
Yeah. And that's all tax dollars. Israelis and Americans, right?
Right. I mean, I just feel like that's obscene on a level. Yeah. And I wish it was as simple as the math shows. You know, I mean, we all know that things are much more nuanced and complex than, you know, what you're just going to read on sort of the spreadsheet there. But still, just that inequity of like what's being spent versus what could be done for, you know, diplomacy and all the other things that could help fix things in the world. Not that we're ever going to solve all the problems in a single podcast conversation, but
never. No, not possible.
We'll certainly try, right?
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying out there. Like, the more you travel, the more you see the world. Like, I studied international politics and stuff like that, and you start to see how all these little fiefdoms get set up and where the money goes and how it gets misappropriated and misallocated and everything like that. And it's just kind of painful. And then you're in, and, you know, and then the crazy thing is that most tax-paying people don't really know where any of their money goes, and they don't really pay too much attention to it. They're just happy to live in the United States, which is good. And, you know, there's opportunities here like nowhere else, and that, you know, you got to pay your tax and whatever. But these blank checks that are being signed everywhere else is terrifying. Yeah. I mean, Canada tries to do it. We're just not big enough or strong enough or have enough people. But we wish we could be right up there. Because that's how you get the influence, I guess, right?
I guess, man. Yeah, just throwing the big weight around. I sometimes just feel like we're the bully on the big playground of the world here in the States.
Someone needs to be, though.
Yeah. I don't know. I just wish we'd play a little more nicely sometimes. Share our lunch money sometimes.
The burden of the bully. Okay, but let's get back to it. So, you were in the UK for 7 years working at, like, basically in a climbing adventure park.
Outdoor adventure sports. I did that for 7 years. When I naturalized as a citizen, basically said, you know, adios, I'm out of here. I'm going to go travel on my freshly printed British passport.
Oh, wonderful.
And I was like, I might as well take advantage of this, right? So, I mean, I really had only had the passport in my hand for the ink was still drying on it practically, and I left my job. I sold everything I owned down to a single backpack. And my last day of work, they knew I was going and everything. And my last day, I added my keys to my manager. And I said, thanks for 7 years. It's been absolutely great. And took my single backpack on the bus and backpacked around the world for a year.
Oh, wow. Where'd you go?
I ended up I spent a lot of time in Turkey. And then,
I love Istanbul.
Oh, man. Yeah. Istanbul's beautiful. I love it. So, like,
that's where I got my cats.
Oh, nice. Street cats. They're famous there.
Yeah. They were street cats. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Wow. Right. That's brave. Pulling in the street cats from Istanbul. I actually spent more time in the south. I was in Antalya for a long time. And then kind of went around in central, western Turkey there, Denizli, Pamukkale, all the coastal cities there. Ended up in Istanbul for a bit. And then jumped across, and I was in Italy for about 6 weeks and volunteered on a vineyard in Tuscany.
How was that?
Oh, man, that was La Vita Dolce. I mean, it was amazing.
Yeah. Everyone out there needs to get a Tuscan villa.
Oh, man, yeah. The great thing about this is I love this whole experience because I went through like, as a volunteer long-term, it's kind of like woofing. It was called Help X, I think. I don't even know if it's still around or not, but it was this old like Italian-Australian couple that had bought this Tuscan villa as like a retirement project way back in the 1980s. And they just kind of left it. They moved to Australia and they just left this, villa to sort of rot in Tuscany. And when they finally retired, like fully retired, they moved back to Italy and they're like, all right, let's get this thing like brushed up and like functional, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they start cleaning it up, and they're like, we should get some volunteers in to help us because this is a big project. So they had, advertised however they did and got people in and started cleaning things up. And after a couple of years, they're like, this is going really well. Why don't we get like a phone line installed? So they're like living in this place, no phone line, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they get, start calling more volunteers. And then a couple more years go by, they're like, this is really good. Let's have electricity. Again, they're living in this place like no services, put electricity in. The week before I arrived, they just installed indoor plumbing.
Oh, wow. That's wild.
They'd lived there for like a decade with like bare bones, minimalist, whatever, this old Tuscan villa, and they just put in plumbing. And I remember the day I arrived, the woman, the wife of the couple said, they're just putting this plumbing, like it's not really settled, the water table, like it's all kind of acting up. So we're gonna ask you to use the outhouse still and just like shower out on the patio, like bucket shower. And at first I kind of rolled my eyes. I was like, man, I'm gonna be roughing it on this farm, like I'm doing all this like hard grafting and telling me I got a bucket shower. Well, after like 2 or 3 days, like all the plumbing and everything sorted itself out, and there were five volunteers that were there along with this couple. And after a couple of days, like all the plumbing sorted itself out, and none of us used the indoor shower. We're like, no, I'm gonna keep like bucket showers on the terrace because it was gorgeous. Like you're just out there under the grape arbor, and like you're just like watching the Tuscan sunset. It was a phenomenal experience to like hang out and learn how to make wine and just explore Italy for a month and a half.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's amazing you had the foresight to give yourself a year just to kind of bum around.
It took a long time to kind of plan that project because I wasn't really sure how I was going to make it work, financially, time-wise, all that kind of stuff. But I just kind of knew that I needed to disappear for a bit and just explore.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up in Turkey, went to Italy, went to Portugal, came back here to the U.S. and, bounced about all over the U.S. For a long time, and then eventually rebounded back to the UK, and that's when I took up a job with British Airways. So I was a flight attendant for a couple of years with that.
Oh, that's a great job. Yeah, that gets you to see the world, doesn't it?
Yes and no. It's worst job I ever had, best lifestyle.
Really?
Oh yeah.
You gotta. Can you want to talk about it? Like, what was so tough about it?
Oh, I mean, it's customer service in the air, and it's literally a pressurized environment. Everybody, I just feel, checks their brain into their hold baggage before they get on board and just goes brain dead. And so you're just, hours on end stuck in this, missile, rocketing at 35,000 feet somewhere above the earth, and you get the weirdest questions and the craziest people, and it's people would always say to me, they're like, oh man, I love your job. I'd love to travel. And I'm like, no. You love to arrive. Like nobody loves the security pat down, the tiny tray table TV dinner, and the little 6-inch screen to watch for 14 hours while you travel across the Pacific. Like nobody loves this, right? Mm-hmm. Like you love the destination. You love to arrive. You love to experience what you have. And people had this sort of like glamorized notion that I was getting paid to, see all these amazing places. Well, I'm so jet lagged. Mm-hmm. I'm so hungry. I have no idea what time zone it is. And, what are you going to do at 4 a.m. in Yokohama, Japan, when there's only sushi on the room service menu and everything else is closed?
Yeah.
I just kind of had this moment in all of these different cities where I felt kind of disappointed that I wasn't really able to engage with travel who I wanted to. Sure, I was seeing things from time to time. You'd get Nairobi on your schedule and you'd be like, oh, I guess I'll go see the giraffe sanctuary today. I got 4 hours where I'm going to be awake and it'll be open.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 6 months later, you're like, oh, I'm going to go see the elephant park, and then maybe a year later, you get Nairobi again. You're like, there's a cool market I wanted to go visit. And after 2 years, you're like, I guess I've been to Kenya, but it doesn't feel like it because it's these little like snippets all the way through.
Yeah. Just enough for Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah, really. I mean, I have friends that are still in the biz and their Instagrams are, it's envy. You're just like, oh man, that looks amazing. But I know the other side of it is you've just slept for 14 hours and you feel like shit.
Yeah. But you're putting on a smile for the gram.
Yeah. I mean, it was, like I said, it was a fabulous lifestyle, but I never knew where I was. I was always hungry. You're in a different hotel every third night. You're never home, And so I'd land back in London, and who's free to hang out with me on a Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. when I happen to be awake?
No one.
Yeah. So it was desperately lonely.
Oh.
I mean, you never fly with the same crew twice. Like your crew always changes, and of course the passengers are always different. And so one of my best friends here, she said to me, she's like, it sounds like it's the perfect job for the shallow extrovert.
The shallow extrovert.
Yeah.
That's nice.
You rock up to the airport, you get your briefing, you get on your party bus airplane to go fly up to some exotic hotel, sit in a hot tub and drink your Mai Tais, and then turn around and fly back 24 hours later because that's all you get. And, they're friends of convenience. They're friends of liquor, basically.
Yeah.
And, it's just, doesn't, lend itself to depth of any variety, really. It's just, you bounce in, bounce out. And I just, after a while, felt like I was a helium balloon that someone had cut the string. And I'm just like left to
floating all around.
Float free in the stratosphere, which sounds exhilarating until you realize the only way to come back down to Earth is you either burst or you run out of gas.
How long do you do that for?
2 very long years.
Well, at least you caught yourself after 2 years. I mean, some people just get into it and stay forever, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have friends that have been in it, since before I started. And I'm just like, man, I don't know how you do it. I don't have the energy.
Yeah, living in Dubai for so many years, you end up meeting like a lot of pilots and stuff like that. And the life is hard, especially if you like want to have a family and kids and stuff. It's almost impossible.
Oh, yeah. It really is. And the number of people who have, more than one family. I mean,
there is that part.
There is that side of the biz, which we don't need to go there today, but it exists. It's a real thing.
Absolutely. So what did you do after BA?
So I quit BA in 2015. Kind of just dossed about London for a year. Kind of just was trying to build my own business, trying to build a brand, trying to figure out what I really wanted to do. Taught English. I had a certificate in teaching English at the time. That was all I had. Sort of qualification-wise, other than my bachelor's degree.
And a British passport.
And a British passport, right? Yeah, I'm like, this is it. Like, what do I do with this? And so one day I get this email in my spam box. It came in out of my spam box. And it was from a website that was, I think it was called EnglishJobsInTurkey.com. And it said, come work in Kurdistan. And it had this amazing salary. They were going to offer to part fund my teaching certificate, like a professional certificate. And I thought, oh, this sounds great. Like, I love Turkey. I'd spent some time there in my gap year traveling around. My neighbors were Turkish. I spoke enough Turkish to kind of get into trouble, just not out of it. And I was like, oh, great, let's do this. So I, applied. And the director of the school got back to me the next day on Skype. And he was like, oh, we're so glad that you want to come and work in Iraq. I just go,
oh, fuck, I think I applied for Turkey.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I just put on the full on poker face. I was like, shit, I didn't read the small print on that email. Like, what is this? And, true enough, it did advertise somehow through this website, but it was Iraqi Kurdistan in Iraq. And, and I thought, oh, shit, all right, well, I got to at least go through the interview. And so asked all the right questions, basically, and kind of tried to figure out what it was like. And
where exactly in Iraq were you? Were you in Mosul?
No, I was in Sulaymaniyah. So it was in the Kurdistan region, kind of about an hour from the border with Iran, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was maybe 3 hours from Mosul. Kind of the opposite side of the country from and I've been to Mosul a couple times. It's incredible. It's a totally unique experience. But yeah, I moved over to Sulaymaniyah in Kurdistan, just kind of on a lark, remembering at the time that, if this was going to be terrible, that I'd just get on the plane, turn around and come home, right? Like,
yeah, you got to give it a try.
Right. Yeah. So it's like, let's give it a try. And if it's terrible, like, I can always leave. They gave me a 1-year contract. I stayed for 7.
Wow. 7 years in Iraq, huh?
7 years. Absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it. I miss it dearly. I wish I could still be there.
And how did you end up having to leave?
Oh, all right. You ready for the drama?
Ready for the drama.
So, I'd spent 7 years building an entire life. I was started off as an English teacher, just low level, worked my way all the way through the faculty and the staff, and ended up being the academic director of the entire school. And had a fair amount of sort of influence in the region. Had meetings with the ministers of education in the capital city of the region, and really saw myself in a position to help rebuild education in post-conflict society. I had lots of opportunities to get the students involved in volunteer work and volunteering with refugees and kind of just helping rebuild a lot of everything.
Well, this seems like a way bigger mandate than just teaching English.
It was kind of my own personal mission in a sense. I just sort of felt that there was more to this opportunity than just rock up and teach English to kids. And so, it just was this kind of responsibility that I felt weighed on me. I felt I needed to do this. And so, I started doing a lot of that and ended up kind of building a bit of an influence in the region. Ended up then publishing my book right after the quarantine. We'll talk about that later, but kind of went up and down the country and gave a big sort of TEDx equivalent talk in Baghdad and found myself in and out of big cities, large groups of people, a lot of influence. And in October of just this last year, so Israel-Gaza breaks out on the 7th. 2 weeks later, I'm just at home. I'd just been out with friends. We'd gone out, for a party somewhere and came back home. And, Israel, Gaza is 2 countries away, right? Like, this is not going to affect me. Like,
two small countries away.
2 small countries away. Yeah, but it's like 2 countries away, right? Like, and I'm used to living in this environment where there's always kind of like these ripples of, oh, something's happening here, something's happening there, but we're okay, right? And, so I literally called my mother just a few days before. I'm like, yeah, everything's fine. Don't worry. Right.
But you're in year 7. I mean, like, everyone's used to you being in Iraq by now.
Right. Yeah. And you get a little bit inured to the entire experience of, any sort of, mischievous activity happening politically. You just kind of get used to it, I guess. And so, here I am. And all of a sudden I get a phone call from the State Department. And they called me directly, me and only one other U.S. citizen that I'm aware of. All my other expat friends are still there. And they called me directly and they said, look, you've managed to get yourself on a list.
Like a kidnap list.
Yeah, on a kidnap list. And we've caught wind of it and you need to go.
Yeah.
Now. Which, freaked living daylights out of me because who am I, right? Like, I'm not like politically engaged. I'm not like.
Someone finally wants me.
Right. In all the wrong ways, right? I mean, it blew my mind. I'm like, what in the world? Like, how? And the only thing they could tell me, because there's some things I still don't know, but the only thing could tell me is, look, you got on this list. We're aware of it. Your workplace and your place of residence are known.
Oh, that's scary.
Yeah. And you need to go as soon as you can. Buy the first commercial plane ticket out and go. And so in 24 hours, I packed up my whole life into 2 suitcases, abandoned the rest. And because I was being tracked, basically, shaved off my beard, sunglasses, hoodie, ball cap to the airport in the middle of the night. Didn't tell anybody that I had left.
That's crazy. What did their work do?
So I went online and booked the week off just for like personal leave on the human resources portal, and basically said, emergency, take the time off, not going to be in for this week.
My life is being threatened.
Yeah. Didn't say anything because I didn't know who I could trust. Like, honestly, I was like, did I like piss off some student's parent? Like with some policy I wrote? Like, I had no idea.
I think lists like this are put together all the time and then waited to be actioned, right? Because obviously, you need some bigger event to happen before you can action on a list like this. So they're just figuring out who their targets are.
Yeah.
And making sure that they know how to get maximum attention when needed, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I now have, in the aftermath, I have a few ideas of maybe who and how. I don't know really what I'm at liberty to say, but it just really freaked me out. So I left, didn't tell anybody, apart from my immediate neighbor who I'd just been out with, and she was there when I had the phone call. And she drove me to the airport, and I flew home and just collapsed.
Back to the UK?
Back to the US.
Oh.
So, because originally I thought, I'll just sidestep for 2 weeks, right? Like, this is just like, it's a little blip on the radar. Like, I'll just take 2 weeks off. I'll go to Dubai. I'll go to Europe. I'll go somewhere, right? And in a second phone call the following morning after that first one, the State Department's like, no, these people have a long memory. You need to get out.
That's crazy, though, because you spend like 7 years building a life, like building a career, having friends, apartment, things of note, right? Like sentimental artifacts all around you of your life. And then it's like in the middle of the night, you just got to run.
Yeah. I mean, for me, like the image that really kind of stuck with me is we'd literally just been out the day before to the hardware store, and I bought a coat rack to hang in my front hallway so I could hang my coats, like I literally had just like, I'm ready to hang up my hat. Like, we're here. Right.
Yeah.
And I left it on the kitchen table, like still in the bag from the shop with the price tag on it, like, gotta go.
How many Americans do you think got the same kind of call?
I'm only aware of one other. Yeah.
There must have been more, though.
There may have and must have, but in terms of my immediate community, I mean, I was connected through, some online Facebook groups and various other chat groups for a lot of the international expats, and all of them that I know are still there.
So it was just people with American passports that they were most fearful of?
Apparently. So
I haven't read of anyone being kidnapped, though. Like, I never saw that in the news, and I read the international news almost every day.
So what I came to learn, kind of in this whole process, I had phone calls with the FBI, the State Department, things I never thought I'd have to say out loud. I mean, this just blows my mind. Like,
you're the most wanted man. You and Snowden. You're lucky you didn't end up in Moscow.
oh my gosh, right? Like, I mean, and honestly, I'm just like, what did I do? Who did I piss off, right? But from what I understood through piecing together different pieces of the story and different sources, I'd been down to Baghdad in April of last year and gave this big talk to a big group of 300 people, and I got my passport in and out of the hands of all these checkpoints that are run by these Iranian-backed militia groups in various points of the country, right? Yeah, which is, it's not really been a big problem because I've been in and out of Baghdad, in and out of Mosul, in and out of checkpoints even throughout the Kurdistan region. Not a big deal, right? Like, people do it all the time. Americans, British citizens, I mean, it's not a thing, really. Mm-hmm. But just the month prior, there had been a girl, she had been doing her doctorate degree out of Yale, I think. And I think she was Russian in descent. She had a Russian passport, but she was affiliated with a U.S. university. And she was abducted by the Iraqi branch of Hezbollah out of a cafe in broad daylight and taken hostage.
That's
to my knowledge, I think she's still held captive. I don't know that she's been released. But that was in March, and April, the next month, I spent an entire week hanging out in that exact same cafe in that exact same neighborhood in Baghdad, handing my passport over to the exact same checkpoint guards. Mm-hmm. And my suspicion is that that's how I got flagged up as a potential somebody. And then as they tracked me through social media and through my postings and through my work in Iraq, they came to see that I had a little bit of influence in the community, and they didn't want me in particular with that kind of influence, the Western guy teaching their kids, or I don't know what it was, but it's just
the ultimate kidnapping victim.
Yeah, it triggered something and it got me on a list. And so overnight disappeared and came back here to the US and had to say goodbye to everything.
Yeah. How hard was that?
I mean, I'm at a point now where I can talk about it and not choke up. Yeah. But honestly, the first 2 months, the first week I came back, I rebound to my parents' house. I'm living in their basement, and I'd sit at the dinner table and just would, out of the blue, just cry, just break down. I would just cutting a piece of chicken and all of a sudden be like, ugly cry. It was terrible. And I went to counseling for a little bit and talked to someone just to kind of work through what was essentially short-term PTSD.
Yeah, it's hugely traumatic to have to go through that and to think your life might be in danger and then I have to just disappear in the middle of the night and leave behind everything you'd built.
Yeah, everything I knew. It's like just pulled out right from underneath me. Just ripped the tablecloth and it all shattered.
It's crazy that a regional war in Israel put your career and your entire, path and your entire lifestyle really, like, it just threw it out the window.
Yeah. It really threw me for a loop, and I mean, I have various connections, sort of third party, like multiple times removed to, Jewish communities or to, same-sex couple communities and things that probably aren't as well received in the larger culture. But in terms of my actual presence and activity and work in the country, I'm there rebuilding education. I'm teaching your kids. I'm doing good work. I'm helping with refugees. I'm, doing all this kind of stuff. And, I guess, that happy Passover post from 6 months ago, right next to happy Easter and happy Ramadan just triggered someone. I don't know. Mm-hmm. I mean, it just really, like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. It's scary because, like, people don't really understand how messed up the Middle East is. And people really don't understand how these militias and these like rebel groups and these terrorists are being funded, and they're everywhere. Like in Iraq, you've got these terrorists and these rebel groups that are backed by Iran.
Yeah.
And in Palestine, you have backed by Iran, and in Saudi, like backed by Iran, and these people are everywhere, just stirring up shit all the time, waiting for big moments to make maximum like news worthy events.
Yeah. It blows my mind, and I just kept saying, like, who am I? Like, I'm not politically involved in any of this. But what I've come to realize, just even coming back here and telling these stories to people and talking through, is I've almost de facto become like a political pundit on Middle East policy.
Yeah.
Just because you live there and you absorb the news all the time. And I don't know that my opinion really has a whole lot of weight and, is even that valid, but you just have this experience that you've lived, and that just speaks volumes more than any headlines you read.
Well, you should. I mean, it's funny. Like when I moved to China in 2001, 2002, the first thing I started doing, I started working for the New York Times and stuff. So I was covering China for like a decade. And what I started to do is I started to go back to my university, University of Toronto, back into the same China programs that I studied in. And I started telling, and I had good relationships with my professors, so I got to be a guest lecturer. And I would go back and tell all these, kids that I used to sit in that seat, and I would just tell them what's going on in China today. Because it's funny, like there's such a disconnect between professors and the stuff they teach and the countries that they teach on, because they're not there.
Yeah.
Right. They're in the U.S. teaching it. And sometimes they don't even go every year. Sometimes they go every 3 years or every 5 years.
Yeah.
And they're supposed to be teaching about what's really going on now. And I've always respected that boots on the ground kind of, perspective, because you would be able to talk about Iraq in a much more meaningful, potent way than any professor would be, because the professor probably hasn't been there since before COVID.
Yeah, it's the head knowledge versus heart knowledge kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, case in point, just actually a few months ago, I was able to participate in a meeting, a roundtable discussion on the Middle East with the International Relations Council. They're a national organization. They've got chapters all over the U.S. And ended up, the guy who led the conversation was the former air attaché for the U.S. government, or the ambassador to Oman, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had a lot of, political experience, boots on the ground from 20 years ago, and kept up with the news and was always reading news headlines. But I was the only one in the room who'd actually been there.
And that's so valuable.
Years.
Yeah.
And so between his perspective and my perspective, the rest of the room was like, oh my goodness. Like we feel like we got like a whole picture of this. We got both sides of the story. We've got current boots on the ground. We've got the kind of like intelligent, like academic headspace from this other guy. And it just, it opened my eyes a lot to a lot of things as well. It helped me understand just in my own circumstances and in being evacuated.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's crazy. A crazy chapter in your life.
Oof, it's going to be the next book. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to call it Between Iraq and a Hard Place.
Iraq and a hard place. Would you ever even consider going back, or have you just written it off as being like, I'm done with that? Because you can't live with that kind of, they can't live under that shadow, right?
Yeah, you can't live with that fear. It's just absolutely terrifying. The day I left, again, I had no concept of how tracked I was, like how followed. Mm-hmm. Is this threat like they're on the rooftop with snipers? Mm-hmm. Or is this like, 6 weeks from now, somebody's going to probably try and roll in? And I had no idea. So I still don't know.
Yeah, well, you're no good to anyone dead, right? They want to just tape you up and put you on YouTube.
I know, right? Oh my gosh, I don't even talk about that. That's going to trigger.
Sorry, but that's how it works, right?
Yeah. And I should know full well because I lived in Iraq, and there's actually a really famous museum in my city that has an entire exhibit to the atrocities with ISIS and everything that's there. It's a very well done exhibit actually, but it's hard to watch. It's hard to visit.
I remember in 2002. In 2002, I think I was in China, and then I did this big trip I went from Hong Kong all the way to Istanbul overland. Best trip I ever did. It took me like 6 or 7 months.
Man, Hong Kong to Istanbul overland.
Yeah. I went into China, and then I went to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Iran, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Turkey.
Man, that's epic.
It was fun. And then after that I went home and crashed for a bit. And I remember I got home, I want to say this was like late 2002 or early 2003, just as they were building up Colin Powell to go to the UN to talk about Iraq and all the weapons of mass destruction on moving trains, traveling around the country all the time. Hugely embarrassing looking back on it now. But then that whole invasion broke out, and I was sitting in Canada being like, fuck, this is terrible. I remember just one day I was like, I got to get out of this. I just went back to China.
Right.
I couldn't handle the news. Like it was just so destructive. Like just the complete manipulation of an entire population
That is, yeah. A total side note, but like totally related. Just 2 nights ago, I met Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Russell, who was in charge of the brigade that captured Saddam Hussein.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah, he was the guy basically that was in command of that whole unit. And fascinating story. I'm currently reading his book.
Oh wow! He wrote a book all about that
Yeah,
capturing Saddam.
Yeah, it's called "We Got Him," and it's, I mean, it's it's a very war memoir kind of thing. But it's fascinating. It was pretty well written actually, and it's it connects to me on a certain level because I've obviously spent time in Iraq, and so I know a lot of those places, and it's easy for me to kind of like picture myself, even though it's 20 years after the fact.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a super fascinating guy, and his perspective on it. Again, we can sit on this side of the table and the relative safety and freedom of North America and be like, oh man, like, why did we go to war with Iraq? And yet, when you're on the front lines and you're sort of in the midst of the battle, like there is a certain kind of, I don't want to say justification, but there's a certain kind of, there's a certain nuance to it that you just understand when you're in the front of it. And he kind of gives that perspective. So it's really fascinating just kind of see how he reasons through his own involvement and that, and obviously Saddam Hussein was someone who'd be out, but
yeah, but
was it our place to do that? I don't know. That's a bigger question, but
it's always like I like, so you study politics I studied politics my whole life, like, and especially in university and stuff like that, and the thing that I've come to realize is sometimes the devil is better than the devil you don't know, and for all of Saddam Hussein's terrible crimes against humanity this is probably going to get me canceled also, but for all of the terrible crimes against humanity and all the things he did to his local people, he kept that country together. And that was a country that didn't want to be kept together because it's ethnically diverse, and each ethnicity wanted to do their own thing, and that eventually led to a civil war, and then terrorists and vacuum, and that's one reason why your life was put in danger. And maybe if Saddam Hussein maybe was still there and he wasn't trying to continually invade other countries like the Iran war, and then of course he invaded Kuwait. Like maybe Saddam Hussein, isolated but still in power, is safer for the rest of the world than a civil war in Iraq.
I can second that opinion really on a level with the voices of my Iraqi friends. That many of them have been known to say, well, thanks, you got rid of Saddam, but now we have many Saddams, and it's just kind of fractured that power. And what a lot of people have kind of ended up saying or feeling is, like you said, better the devil they knew than the devil they didn't. And, there was, with Saddam, at least, you may not have had the freedom, but you knew where you stood.
And the U.S. was selling Saddam weapons to fight the Iranians in the 80s. I mean, he was buying U.S. weaponry. I mean, like, he was a friend. I mean, there's pictures of Saddam and like Donald Rumsfeld and like Dick Cheney, like, walking around, touring Baghdad and stuff like that. I just feel like, with the right kind of pressure, you can control small, and same with Gaddafi, Libya is a fucking mess right now. Yeah. And it's never going to be okay. Like, the civil wars going on there are just insane. Like, everyone's fighting everyone now.
Yeah. And it is that it all comes back to that, like, and I was talking with my brother actually last night about this, and just the concept of like the U.S. really almost doesn't care who's in power in any particular country in the world, as long as they know where they stand with them.
Yeah, as long as you can work with them.
Yeah, I can work with you, which is basically, I think, in my opinion, why we haven't really done anything with the fall of Afghanistan back to the Taliban, because the Taliban at least had their own like system and agenda that they just put into place. And yeah, we don't like the Taliban, but you got a whole system, and at least we'll have a conversation, know where we stand with you at this point.
Because you just can't keep invading countries and putting in puppet leaders and expecting everyone to get along. Like that, it's the world is too complicated for the U.S. to fix all problems.
Right. Yeah. And it's just, I mean, we're drifting into like modern colonialism now, when we're trying to like install democracy everywhere, when some people, it's not what they want or not what they need, I mean, we're not the best country in the world. Sorry, but it's, we've got our own set of problems, and we're not going to solve everybody else's.
I think the days of like exporting democracy is over.
It should be if it's not.
Because I mean, like, because you have to understand, like, from my perspective, and so I left Canada when I was like 22, and then I lived in China, so that was a communist country.
Yep.
And then I left that and I lived in a Dubai. So we had a royal family, right?
Yeah.
And in the United Arab Emirates. And then now I'm here and I can't vote here either. So like I've spent my whole life kind of drifting around, living in countries where I don't have any say,
Yeah.
but I have freedom to make a living and freedom to kind of go about my business and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
it's been fine. Like I haven't, but this kind of like, you must have democracy, the people must have their voice. Like this doesn't work everywhere. And, and it's kind of terrifying the way this whole like nation building, nation rebuilding, has been going on for like the last 20 years. I think it's like starting finally to fizzle out. And I think Afghanistan may have been like the last straw.
Yeah. I mean, I don't really know. I mean, and I'm not going to sit here and say, democracy is terrible. Like, I'm actually really glad I lived in a democratic country. This is fantastic, but it's not the system for everybody. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And, I'm happy for what I have here and I'm happy for those freedoms. But at the same time, it doesn't translate everywhere.
No. There's a lot of countries around the world with a lot of different beliefs. And like you said, as long as you can work with their leadership and you know where they are and you've got good ambassadors who can pick up the phone and figure out what's going on locally and then report back, it's better than trying to rebuild a whole country, isn't it?
Right? Yeah. I mean, it just on a kind of metaphorical level, even my brother and I were talking about this again last night, and just the idea that you really only know what you believe and who you are through relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And that extends even to a macro level with politics and nation states. Like America's only who we are through the relationships that we have with other nation states and, political powers. And so they don't all have to be exactly the same. Part of what makes life really super fascinating is that there's diversity.
Yeah.
So,
well, this is, if the Saddam Hussein comment doesn't get me canceled, this one will. One of the things that's terrifying me right now about this war with Russia in Ukraine, obviously this unprovoked invasion of Ukraine by Russia two years ago now, is everyone's calling for Putin to be killed off or something like that. But again, it's like the devil you know versus the devil you don't. Like imagine if Putin goes down and then Russia is consumed with like some kind of civil war or power struggle with nuclear weapons. A country of that size, clearly they're not as strong militarily as we all thought they were because they've been struggling so much in Ukraine, and Ukraine's military was not up to par when the war started, but somehow they've fought hard. Everyone's helped out, sent them lots of weapons, defended themselves. They're doing their best, but at the same time, like, I'm completely feared because I still remember like the Berlin Wall. Like I still remember,
I still watching it come down.
I remember Boris Yeltsin and how unqualified he was to run that country and how much of a drunk he was, and then how Putin just kind of slipped into power, randomly almost, and
definitely. I don't even remember that making headlines. I mean, I'm sure it did, but like all of a sudden, here's this name on the political landscape, and it's like, oh, I guess this guy's turned to Russia.
Yeah, and he started off as like the vice president or the premier or something like that. He was second to Yeltsin for a little while, and then eventually Yeltsin was, doing these massive events and press conferences completely wasted, and then everyone was like, he's got to go, and then all of a sudden Putin got the tap. But I mean, if he's the vacuum, all I'm saying here is, I don't like Vladimir Putin. Obviously, the war is terrible, but the vacuum that Putin has created for himself around him means that if he goes, there's no obvious person to be installed into that position, and people will fight for it because he's built a mafia. Like he's the mafia head, right? All money goes to him. Yeah. So he's built this chain of loyalty through financial means of stealing money from the state and pillaging it, and if he's gone, I'm terrified for Russia. I'm for the world actually, because I think Russians will have a really rough time, and some people might say, oh, they deserve it for invading Ukraine or whatever, if that's your opinion. But I think it's just so dangerous for the region if there's a power struggle.
Yeah, I mean, the Russia-Ukraine thing, the Russian politics is really out of my wheelhouse. It's really not anywhere in my framework of reference. But that structure is of removing someone from power only to create a vacuum that gets filled with who knows what.
Iranian-funded militias. Hezbollah, ISIS, whatever, they're all going to be there.
It'll be the equivalent of, if it's not that, and that is terrifying. That is absolutely terrifying. Mm-hmm. And I think the real challenge is to understand how to navigate those relationships and navigate those political disagreements so that you don't end up creating those vacuums. And I know it sounds terrible to be like, oh, let's keep Putin in for a while, but you don't know what the alternative is. And that's that same scenario that we had with, so much of the Middle East. And it's, man, yeah, and nobody has an answer.
No. And, like even just looking at China's political system. So they used to have, like, they have a communist party, right? So they have a Politburo of 8 men that are dressed almost exactly the same. And they choose everything that happens in the country. And those 8 men rotate there's some changes every 4 years, but then they have a more complete makeover every 8 years, right? So, President Xi Jinping, Hu Jintao, all these guys that came in, they did their 8 years and they left quietly, right? And they built up businesses and their families have connections and everything. And that's why everyone gets into politics, right? So It's all insider trading and making money for themselves and their families. So they get their 8 years at the top seat, they take what they need, and then they move on, right? And then Xi Jinping comes in and he declares himself emperor for life, and he unbalances the entire thing.
Yeah.
And I just remember how hard it was doing business in China once he declared himself emperor for life. And it's funny, like overnight, it's almost like the entire country kind of became anti-Western, and which is strange because for decades it was so open and so welcoming, and people were so happy, and the leaders before him were so much more Western leaning and so much more like, let's grow the economy at all costs.
Yeah.
Whereas now it's like, the thought police are everywhere. It's kind of terrifying all of a sudden again.
Wow.
But I haven't been there since December 2019. So it would be interesting to go back and take the temperature if I can even get a visa.
I know, right? Yeah. I know, man. Yeah. Global politics. It's just like,
we should go and get a bottle of whiskey and sit here and really hammer out some U.S. policy, some foreign policy.
Oh man, it'd be all opinion really and bias probably on my part. I mean, it's really hard to overcome your own internal biases, and in all honesty, I have to hold my hands up here and say I'm just not educated enough to really have an informed opinion on so much of it. But
you know what really has sharpened my opinion about some of these things was actually like living in Dubai during COVID for the last few years. Yeah, because it's the money laundering capital of the world.
Yeah.
So when there's wars in Africa and when there's wars in Europe and stuff like that, Eastern Europe or Ukraine and things like that, the amount of ill-gotten gains that ends up flowing through places like Dubai and Qatar is unbelievable. And of course, the royal family and all these people, like, they just look the other way, right? And it's become a real issue. And Dubai was put on OECD, gray list for money laundering and stuff like that, and because so much Russian money was pouring into Dubai at the beginning of the war and stuff like that, because people were trying to get assets out of Russia, and it's a massive, massive problem. And but it finely tunes your impressions or your opinions about world politics when you can sit in a place like that and see all the shit happening around, being like, well, the United States is trying so hard to make this stop, but then all of that is just coming here.
Yeah.
And Europe is trying so hard to make this stuff in Africa stop, but then all of this stuff is just ending up here. And it's just billions of dollars of ill-gotten gains pouring in every day.
Such like rankle your gut.
It just goes to show you how wrong it is to think you can control everything, and I think like, in the United States, we all have a social insurance number. I don't, because I'm not a citizen or really a resident yet, but it's like everyone pays their taxes, everyone, but the rest of the world doesn't work like that. And people move money, people hide money, people steal money. This is the world we live in. And, there's a great documentary on Netflix called Man on the Run, which it was actually directed by my good friend Cassius Michael Kim, and he did a whole expose on the 1MDB Malaysian sovereign wealth fund, where like $8 billion just kind of went missing.
Oh gosh.
And they funded like the Wolf of Wall Street, and this guy who was running the fund was like living this lavish lifestyle and spending money on private jets and flying all around the world, and it was all, and the amount of money going back and forth between the Middle East and Malaysia was like hundreds of millions of dollars, and they were buying things, and Goldman Sachs was like pricing in these bonds and selling this sovereign wealth fund these bonds at way too high a rate, because the guys who were buying them were getting kickbacks on the side, and Goldman Sachs was making a shit ton on this. So this all came out. This is all public knowledge, right?
Yes.
But it just goes to show you just how filthy people at the top are. running these businesses. And the president of Malaysia at the time, you know, he had to defend this like $700 million transfer that he got from one of the royal family members in Saudi Arabia, and he said it was like a gift.
Who gives $700 million as a gift? Like,
I would love to be on the list.
I know, right?
Yeah,
like I'll take just a portion of that.
Yeah, 1%'s enough for me. I'll be okay. Yeah, but it just like they're just rolling around on this level where nothing matters and no one understands what's going on, and it's just this corrupt political elite that's floating around. I mean, that's why guys like who's the WikiLeaks guy? I mean, he's still in jail. Julian Assange.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it really boils down to, you know, I mean, again, we're looking macro versus micro, but it's the condition of the human heart on a level.
Yeah,
like
you're not going to stop it.
We all have a certain amount of greed and selfishness and desire that we all live with on a day-to-day level, and you blow that up to a global scale. You know, I mean, the line, as Solzhenitsyn says, the line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every man. Like,
it's terrifying. It's terrifying. So, okay, wow, that was a nice little tangent.
Man, yeah, we've wandered in the deep weeds on that one.
Might have to edit out the last 20 minutes just in case. Yeah, don't want that going out into the world. Real ideas, real thought from two people who have really traveled and seen the world.
I know, right? Oh my goodness.
God forbid someone actually respects our opinion or asks for it.
Oh.
So, wow, 7 years in Iraq, your life there ends in over 24-hour period. You fly back to the United States, shell-shocked.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even imagine, like, just, sitting at home with your family and being like, what the fuck just happened to my whole life?
Yeah. It's been a ride. It's been a ride, Ryan. I mean, just like, the last 6 months, I've just tried to figure out, like, how do you rebuild, you know?
Well, the question isn't how. I think the question is where. Like you want to, building your career and having a life is like building a skyscraper, and you don't want to build your skyscraper on sand.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like shifting sands like that, you know, and it's like, where can you plant your flag?
Yeah.
For the next 7 to 10 to 20 years,
where
you're not going to get a call in the middle of the night saying you got to get on a plane.
I know, right? I mean, I've really had to put that into deep consideration and thought, because I could stay here in the States. I really could. I've got, family here, but I don't have that desire, that draw, or even, to be honest, the qualification. Like, all my real qualifications were earned abroad. You know, my master's degree, my teaching, everything has just been overseas, and it doesn't translate so easily here. And while I could, make that happen and do all the right avenues and, bureaucracies to do that, part of me just doesn't really want to work here in the States, because...
Well, once Trump wins again in November, everyone's going to try to leave again.
Right, we're all going to rush for the Canadian border, right? That's what happened last time. Did the Canadian immigration site crash?
I don't know what happened. But the Canada is not what it used to be. I can tell you that much.
Yeah.
Well. We were. Something really happened to me personally with the way I view Australia and Canada during COVID. It was like this sneaky, surprising level of fascism just rose up.
Oh, wow.
And the government just kind of really relished in the fact that they could control everyone all of a sudden. And I had a friend in Melbourne who was like, they were locked down for like 18 months.
And Australia was like hardcore. Like, they didn't fuck about down there.
Yeah. So like, when I think about where I want to plant my flag and where I want to, have a career again and where I want to do these things, China was hard, and especially after COVID, like to think that they can lock up society like that again. Like these are things I fear about, because I don't make money unless I can get on an airplane. Yeah. And I don't make money unless there's 100 people in an audience watching me talk. I get paid for that, or I can make TV shows, and I have to travel to do that.
Yeah.
And to not be able to travel, or to be locked in my home for months on end, like, it completely destroys my entire ability to earn a living. And I'm just thinking, like, and as I get older in life, I'm like, well, where am I going to go? Like, because there's going to be another pandemic, because people made way too much money on this last pandemic.
Right? Yeah. I mean, are we going to be like economic incentive to like disease the population again? I mean,
yeah, I really think that's a thing now. Like, and and it doesn't even have to be government led. I mean, it could be someone in Russia, a virologist, who unleashes something in Washington, D.C., and then shorts the U.S. stock market, And like, I feel like during the pandemic that we just had, like, you know, let's speak specifically about the United States. Like, a lot of people in the United States profited massively. And of course, you know, Pfizer and the shareholders and then people, you know, a lot of the PPE and stuff like that, a lot of it was developed in the United States. And then, of course, you have, you know, all these apparent science leaders that were all had massive IP ownership of all these bits and pieces of the drugs and made millions and millions of dollars on some of this. It's all coming out now. Fauci, I think, goes back in front of Congress this week or next week to explain all of that. Yeah, the unraveling is happening. But it could very well be like 9/11, where no one in the United States made money from it. It was like, I was all being shorted by Osama bin Laden and everyone in the Middle East, right? So it's just like, if you take the pandemic and you put a 9/11 twist on it, someone could unleash something like that in the United States and just short the market, and, you know, and then that'd be it, right? And it's like, how do we rebuild from that? Yeah. I think about these things a lot.
You got some dark ideas here, Ryan.
I've seen too much shit.
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the world and you see the dark part of mankind, basically, that's there.
You know what the worst thing I've seen is?
And do I want to know?
In May 2008, I was in China covering. So the build up to the Olympics was massive in China. So Olympics was August 2008. The build up, news media wise, was massive. Everyone thought like this Olympics was going to like change China, like somehow the Olympics was going to usher in democracy. Fucking naive. But anyways, what happened in May of 2008 is there's a huge earthquake in Sichuan province in southwest China. So like I know for a fact like hundreds of thousands of people died, but official numbers was 88,000, which is strange because eight is a lucky number in China. So like, why would you make it 88? Odd. But that's what they went for. But it was funny because at the beginning of the coverage of this earthquake, the foreign media was welcome. The military who were on the ground helping people and helping to evacuate people and helping to clear debris, and you know, they were very welcoming of the media. Everything was like really like, let's help each other. Like people were. It was like a really beautiful kind of coming together for the first week. Yeah, and then we started catching wind of all these stories about these school children dying.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And people started asking questions like, well, why did like a disproportionate number of school children die during an earthquake? Okay. The earthquake happened at 10 a.m. in the morning or something like that. Okay. So they were in school. Okay. So let's go in and figure out like how these schools were really built. And it turns out that these schools were built really cheaply, even though they charged a huge amount of money for the construction. Yeah. But they were built at a way, way less decent standard than the buildings all around them. So what you'd happen is you'd go into these neighborhoods and you would see the school was completely pancaked, but all the residential buildings around were still standing. Yeah. So we started doing, so I was working for the New York Times, and we started doing, and Time and Newsweek and Fortune. I was freelancing for a bunch of people for those weeks there. But I was there for a couple of weeks, and it was devastating because I also got to see this tide turn, like where the first week everyone was super welcoming and super happy. And then we started reporting on the schools, and the government shut us down. Yeah, like they're just like, we were going to schools, and the mothers of the children in China had a one-child policy at that time. They've changed it since. So these are like the only children of these mothers, and these mothers were doing candlelight vigils at the school because the schools collapsed, but they didn't get all the bodies out. Like they just... Yeah. Anyways, they're holding pictures of their kids, and I'm there photographing and talking to these people, and then we started getting detained, and the foreign media was getting arrested, and that's just, everything just turned on a moment because we started figuring out a little bit more than we should have. And I always feel like that's the way politics works.
Didn't you?
I don't know. I still stayed for a decade after that, but I was definitely on a list. But it's like, that's kind of the worst thing I think I've seen, where the sentiment changes so quickly, and then all of a sudden, you know, everyone's trying to hide something, and then it just comes out, and then everyone just make your life as miserable as possible until you just leave.
Until they don't want you to see the other side of the curtain.
No, I think that's like too much of that. You can see too much of that in our society today, and especially in politics, right?
Yeah. And that's tragic. Tragic stuff, man.
Crazy. But it's nice to chat with someone who's been around as much as you have.
Man, yeah, it's 20 years of my life, in and around all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people who are travelers like us, it's country counting, and you hop in, hop out. But I've found, for me, I've really enjoyed just kind of staying put in a certain place for a number of years and kind of diving into the culture and getting to know just more about what it's like to be on the ground. Because you can sit there and rack up as many UN recognized countries as you want, but do you remember any of it? Did you really engage and meet the people? And that's not to downplay people who do that for as their thing, but I've just always found it's just way more fascinating to get to know in depth the people and the culture and the society where I live.
Yeah.
So
yeah, anytime I'm on Instagram and I'm just scrolling around and I come across like some interesting, nice picture, and I go to that person's profile, man or woman, whatever, and they're like, oh, 42 countries and counting, I just block them.
Yeah, I mean, for a while I was counting, but then I was just like, does it really matter? No, I know. What matters is the connections I've made with the people and how I've actually lived my life in the world. Am I doing the right thing, or am I doing the easy thing? And there's a difference between those two.
Definitely. I mean, maybe it's time for something in South America. I mean, I feel like South America is relatively stable these days, and of course, you're not dealing in a war-torn environment, but you are dealing with countries that are struggling and trying to rebuild.
Yeah.
Argentina maybe comes to mind specifically. Brazil's a mess as well, but those are I mean, I've been all around Brazil. I filmed in Argentina too. I mean, those are countries I could easily live in.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, I love Brazil. My time there has been just absolutely fantastic. I loved it. And I did look into that actually, but I'm actually super excited because I have just recently accepted a position in West Africa.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to be moving over to Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast.
That's right. You've got your French, right?
I do, yes. So that was really the allure, is it kind of matched with, my language skills, my background in education at the school. I was a new continent and I've lived on, give me an opportunity to kind of live in a new environment. And just, I'm really sort of excited about that as a new chapter. It's going to, be hard, I know, to rebuild in a new space, a new place, and new community, but it's part of the adventure, right?
Has there been a coup recently in the Ivory Coast? I mean, I don't know the politics at all, actually.
I'm learning a lot about it right now. I'm kind of doing my research. So I mean, there was a civil war about a decade or so ago. And in my interview with some of the people who worked at the school, they're like, yeah, we're ruled by a benevolent despot now, so we're okay.
Yeah, until.
Until, right? Yeah. So who knows? But, better the devil you know than the devil you don't, right? So apparently he's in and everyone's okay with it. So we're just going to live with it. So, but I'm learning and doing my research, and it'll obviously, kind of solidify once I'm on the ground and actually get to see it in person. So
that'll be nice. So when do you take up that position?
I'll be departing for West Africa in August.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So the school year starts September. So I'll give myself a lead time, a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So.
Well, that's nice. You're putting it back out there and, planting your flag in West Africa. That's exciting.
Yeah. I'm excited. It's a corner of the world I really haven't spent much time in. I've just kind of dropped in and out as a flight attendant, a couple of layovers, a decade ago, but I haven't, ventured outside of that. So
I filmed in Tanzania. Maybe the wrong side of the country.
Wrong side.
Yeah. Filmed in Morocco, the right side of the country, just a little too far north.
Yep.
Muslim Morocco. And then where else have I been? Oh, Uganda was amazing. I've been.
Okay.
I went all through. I did this guerrilla trek.
Oh wow.
Thing in Uganda, southern Uganda. It was
nice.
really spectacular.
Yeah. No, I'm super excited just to go and explore a different part of the world and just see what there is. It's just, again, there's just so much. There's so much to learn, and there's so much to see, and so many people to meet, and
I always thought the United States would be a much better off country if maybe after high school or maybe after university. Probably after high school, if everyone took a government-funded 1 year break and either worked for the Peace Corps or just traveled, to a country that doesn't speak English that they have never been to before, and I just felt and then those experiences, those life-changing experiences that those people have when they come back here, will make the fabric of the society here just much more rich, I think.
Yeah. I've often said to people, Ryan, that there's a certain kind of tolerance that's bred when you are living overseas and your government, where the government of the country you're living in has to rub shoulders, sociopolitically with its neighbors. And America just happens to be one of the world's largest countries, isolated by the world's two largest oceans. And so not that we're intolerant necessarily as a country, but it's just not the same. We don't have the same understanding of what's happening in the rest of the world as you do if you're living in England and happen to know that the German chancellor has done this, or that the trade agreement with France has done that, or you're living in Iraq and you know what's happened with Syria, or that the missiles flown overhead from Iran, or whatever. Like, you just have more of a connection with what's happening with your neighbors when you live and work and breathe in a space that just has to connect with other cultures. And unfortunately, it's just, the States is just so monolithic on a level that, was it less than 10% of Americans even have a passport or something like that? I mean, it's just a shockingly low number.
Yeah, it's like, I think it's 75 or 80% of Americans do not have a passport. I think that's the number.
Yeah, it's just like, oh my goodness, get out there and see the world. It's a big place.
But it's true. Like, I did say that thing before about, leaving and doing a year abroad and things like that. But then also too, like, there's something quite nice about like small town America and people who don't travel and who just kind of like live and consume everything that they need in their lives in their, small communities with their family nearby and grandchildren nearby. And, there's like, why would I go anywhere? Something kind of like endearing about that too. But then again, it's like we live in a super messy world. And the more we know about it and the more we learn about it, I think the better off we'll be.
Yeah, that's a hard balance to strike, really. Because there is something really endearing and great about having a community to rely on and to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
And, if you're just always not connected, I mean, we're designed to connect with people. Like, that's built into our DNA, I think, and it's, I don't know, that's a hard one to parse out, I think.
Oh man, you're going to have a good time exploring West Africa.
Yeah, I'm super excited. Super excited. New place. So
and going to someplace new is the best. So look, you mentioned briefly that you wrote a book when you were in Iraq. I want to get into this a little bit. So you're working in Iraq. You went as an English teacher, and then you're just like, whoa, I can do way more than just teach English. And then you became an academic director.
Mm-hmm.
What was the topic? What was the name of the book, and what was the kind of the idea and the vision behind it?
Yeah. So the book actually departs from my life in Iraq. And it's set during quarantine, during COVID, because what happened is, I'm living this fairly intense life in Iraq and working my way up through the ranks and doing all this sort of volunteer work. And I was halfway through my master's degree at the time, so I had this sort of really intense headspace. And so in early of March of 2020, I decided to sort of downshift and disconnect for a week. I was going to take a spring break on a remote Greek island. And I was going to go partly, disconnected. I wanted someplace kind of off-grid a little bit. And so I found myself a resort, on Samos Island. It's a little less touristed, but not completely off-grid, and decided I was just going to go with my carry-on bag for a week and kind of, detox. Well, long story short, the day I arrived, the World Health Organization says we're, global pandemic, and all the dominoes topped and borders closed, and I ended up being stuck on this island for 5 months.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I'd gone with just my carry-on bag, thinking I was going to be there for a week. I don't speak Greek, and I was just going to be there. And then it turned into another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, another 2 weeks, because you never knew how long, you didn't know how long this was going to be.
That happened to me in Istanbul.
Yeah. So, we were right across the water from each other pretty much. Yeah. So I ended up sort of just living in this space. I was the only guest in the resort for 4 out of the 5 months. And the hotel owner basically just gave me the keys. He's like, don't give me COVID, stay away. Like, it's in the air. Everybody's got it. Like, and kind of left me to my own devices. And so I'm alone on this island the entire time with all the time in the world to sort of think. And it's, people will be like, oh, it must have been so hard. It was, in a sense. It was a great experience I wish to never repeat, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the magic really happened partway through as local restrictions started to lift. And I was able to explore the island a little bit, and I'd started to develop relationships with people in the community, walking back and forth to the market or whatever, and discovered there was a refugee camp on the far side of the island.
Oh, really? Yeah. That's interesting.
And so it was filled with all these refugees from the Middle East, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan. And so here I am, a man from the West, caught in Greece, trying to get back to his home in the Middle East, all of a sudden crossing paths with all these refugees from the Middle East, caught in Greece, trying to get to the West. And so our paths intersected, and I ended up volunteering to teach English in the camp, connected with all of their stories, learned so much about the global migration crisis, and really just changed our perspectives on a lot of things. And so the arc of the memoir is really trying to find a place to call home. And not just geographically, but sort of internally in your own heart. Like, it has a really sort of spiritual side to it, where it explores just the concept of what it means to be at home in yourself, what it means to know who you are in relationship with others. And
that's not a small question.
No, it's not. Yeah. And it explores, and, I don't know that I have a really solid answer for it, but it explores around that and really gives you this rich tapestry of a story, a true story of, looking for a place to call home, actually physically to return, but also to figure out who I am.
And what's the title of the book?
As Large as Your Spirit, a reverse refugee memoir.
A reverse refugee memoir.
Yeah. So it was super fun to write. I'm actually really, really pleased with it because just this last 2 months ago, reached the 4th round finalist for the Best Independent Book Awards.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah,
That's no small task.
Someone other than my mom liked it.
Yeah.
A lot of people have. It's been really well received, but I'm super pleased that it's getting a little bit of recognition, and it was super fun to write.
I only do these podcasts for my mom. So, she watches every one. Oh, you had such a nice conversation with that guy or that woman. Yeah. That's funny. But no, I mean, congratulations on the book, and congratulations for like using COVID to do something to like, be useful, because I had a crazy one. I was in Ethiopia.
Ooh. Yeah.
Filming.
Yeah.
Okay. So the build up to COVID was crazy. So I filmed in Hong Kong in November 2019 when they were having that anti-China national security riot.
Oh, yeah.
And it was crazy, right? And we were filming there while that shit was going on. And I was making a travel TV show, so I had to ignore all the tear gas.
Oh my gosh, right? Yes.
And then, in December, I think I came back to Canada for Christmas, which was the first time I'd been back to Canada for Christmas in like decades. And then I went, and then I was putting together like a couple big projects in Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia was opening.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want to be like boots on the ground. Like I want to talk to everyone and figure out what's been going on the last 20 years and what.
Fascinating.
Yeah, really. I've been there a few times. I drove all around the country. So in January 2020, I drove all around Saudi Arabia. I went to St. Petersburg and Moscow for a bit too, which are two cities I used to love. And
we were in Saudi at the same time. I was there end of December, early January, 2019, 2020.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Yeah, right when it opened up.
I flew into Riyadh and I went to Avis and I rented a car and put like 10,000 miles on it and drove all around Saudi Arabia. Yeah.
Wow.
It was like 2 weeks.
That's epic.
Yeah.
Epic.
Because I wanted to, like, I was dealing with the Tourism Bureau and the Minister of Culture. They wanted me to come in and make some adventure shows and like show off the country was opening. And I was like, fine, that sounds all great. But I want to like understand the country a little bit for myself. So I usually take, like when I was making lots of TV shows all the time, I was always take January off because it was nice. And so I took January off, and so I traveled all around Saudi Arabia and just and loved it. I mean, there's not a lot of countries on this planet that have like really epic wilderness.
Yeah. Oh man.
Like
Saudi it's raw. It's
it really is. And the deserts and the emptiness and the landscape and stuff like that really hits you. Yeah. And those are the kinds of places I love filming. Like China has it, the US has it, Mongolia has it. Yeah. Like Kazakhstan. Oh my God. Yeah. Kyrgyzstan. So like a lot of Central Asian countries, they really like, it really grips you just how wild the wilderness is. And that's what we love showing on camera.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, been to several of those places, and it's my eyes light up. I'm like, oh man, yeah.
And then, so I was pitching all this stuff in Saudi Arabia, and then I did this driving trip in Saudi Arabia. And then in February, I was supposed to go to Saudi Arabia, but they said, well, let's wait. There's this COVID thing happening. And I'm like, it's just in China. We'll be fine. So then I went and filmed in Myanmar. And I went to film in Myanmar. We were doing this thing in the Chin Hills, which is near Bagan, which is where they have all the beautiful temples and they fly the hot air balloons and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And we filmed a beautiful episode there. But then when I was coming back mid-February, like Asia was closing and everyone was wearing masks. I remember we flew from Bagan to Bangkok and then back to Dubai, my director of photography and I, and like we could feel it all closing. And then I was like, well, Saudi Arabia pushed our production again. So then I was like, I'm just going to go to Africa and start filming because Africa will stay open no matter what, right? And I was like, there's so many beautiful countries and so many great things to film. So then I went to Ethiopia and then I was offline for a few days and then I climbed to the top of a mountain and then checked my phone and the world closed.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't go back to Dubai, didn't want to go back to Canada. So Turkey was open. So I just flew to Istanbul and then I did my 4 or 5 months there. That was the first lockdown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is... Man, it was crazy. I mean, everybody's going to remember where they were, you know.
It's like a war.
Yeah.
It's like a war.
It really was. It was collective trauma.
Collective trauma, and you are not the same person today you were in 2019.
Yeah, definitely not.
No.
Definitely not.
And it's funny because I was chatting with someone here and they were saying like they have a YouTube channel too and things like that. And they were saying like how YouTube suppresses content where people are talking about COVID and stuff like that. Yeah, because they didn't want people like questioning the vaccine and questioning this and masks and blah, blah, blah. But then I was like, well, that's kind of like, coming out in 1947 and being like, no one's allowed to talk about World War II anymore.
Man, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Because we all have stories, and
Yeah.
the world was fucking crazy for a few years. And
Oh, man.
and if you're a global traveler, like you ended up somewhere you weren't supposed to be.
oh man, yeah. I mean, I know plenty of people, just connected online just because we were all stuck in weird random corners in
Yeah.
the world. And it's like, I'm not home. I'm not with my community. I'm not with my people. I don't speak the language. I mean, there's just, yeah,
It was
that was a hard, crazy time.
It was. I started up these things called the COVID calls where I would just call up all my friends and have Instagram live chats with them totally publicly.
Yep.
And we would have thousands of people watching. Like one I did with this guy, Sean, who's this crazy cyclist. He lives in South Africa, Cape Town, I think. And we had like 900,000 people listening to our conversation at one time. And it was just, it was like, what are 900,000 people doing listening to him and I talking? Because we'd never met. Yeah, and we're just like, let's have a chat. And we just lit it up and we're on Instagram Live for an hour. And yeah,
It's crazy. There's a lot of people. I mean, we're all stuck at home. We got nothing to do. So scroll through and see who's on, right?
that was pretty much it. But I just did, I did 100 of those in 100 days. And that kind of got me through
that's super
that isolation. Yeah.
Yeah. I did something similar, not nearly to the same scale, but I self-recorded a couple videos that I called Lockdown Life Lessons. And I'm just, filming myself on the beach. I did one sort of like every 2 to 3 days. And I'd upload onto YouTube and Instagram, whatever. And had a little mini following, It was just kind of just my verbal journaling. I was kind of like diarrhea of the mouth, basically, on what
you got to get it out.
But yeah, like, I mean, you're just, when you have no company but your own, you got to figure out how to process what's happening.
How did you not adopt a pet?
Wow, man, I don't want that kind of responsibility. The hotel owner, he had a dog, and after he got over his initial fear of like me transferring COVID to the dog who would transfer it to him, he's like, everything is, he was paranoid, really. He's a great man. I loved him. Really came to be a really close friend. Their family dog basically kind of became my own pet after a while.
Oh,
so he'd come and lay out on the terrace outside my unit where I was staying, and I'd sit there and, read a book and make my blogs. And I was teaching online part-time, and trying to upload stuff for my students. And so I'd just sit there and, hang out with the dog for a while. And
on a Greek island.
I mean, it was,
I remember.
Trust me, it really wasn't rougher than it sounds. I mean, it really, really was. But, there were elements that were just glorious. There were moments where it's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm getting to do this. But at the same time, this is not where I'm meant to be in life.
No. We were all, I think, for people who like travel internationally, it's very funny, like how we all got stuck somewhere where we weren't supposed to be, and how that like played out.
Yeah.
Because I mean, people in the United States, like everyone's just, okay, work from home. It's like, okay, well, instead of doing this at the office, I just do this at home, and there's kids and cats
and everything.
Adults.
It's just, and and it's so hard to maintain, And I think, man, that's a whole other audio essay. I'm sure we can talk about that, but.
So
drop.
So what do you have planned for the rest of the year? I mean, what's going on in your space? You're going to Ivory Coast in August. I mean, you've had a hell of a scare. You've had a hell of a life so far. I mean, do you feel like writing about what happened to you in Iraq and how you have to leave? Is that another book in you maybe?
Yeah, like I'm not actually joking. I'm calling it Between Iraq and a Hard Place. I have written like a good couple chapters into it already. So
that's amazing.
It'll take a while to really actually process and edit and try and figure out how I want to package that whole thing. But, my working draft right now, I've been starting to put it down in words because, when you have that traumatic experience, there is something about writing that helps you process. And so that's kind of what I've decided to do with this particular instance, is to see how I can process that in a way that captures people's imagination, their attention, but also gives a level of truth to the experience. So,
and it'll help you find closure for sure.
Yeah.
Like I've had a lot of people on the podcast actually who have written books, and a lot of it details trauma that they've gone through as children and in their early parts of their lives, and writing helps them kind of get through it. And then once they put it out into the world, there's some cathartic feeling that you get from that, and it kind of lightens the load that you're carrying around a little bit, right?
Yeah. I've told people that writing my first book was the thrice lived trauma, and that I lived it personally. Thrice lived, yes. I lived it personally, and then I relived it in my mind as I wrote it down, and then I relived it as an editorial team picked it apart and told me I needed to change this and put that in there and take this put out and tell me, basically my experience wasn't good enough at the first draft.
And then it's going to be quadruple because then you're going to be speaking about the book for years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's basically what I've been doing for this past year, has been kind of throwing it out there and talking about that experience, and then talking about the upcoming one as well, and trying to see what I can do to put that all out there.
Would you ever, I don't mean to put you on the spot, and I just feel like, yeah, I'll just ask it anyways. I mean, like, would you ever work for the U.S. government?
Oh, that leaves a bitter taste in my mouth, distaste.
I'm speaking it to you as a compliment, because I feel like the experiences you've had in your life, and the places you've had a chance to live and work and travel and explore, is an area and an expertise that is seriously lacking. Mm-hmm. And again, you have, recent boots on the ground experiences. Like, I know you're an educator and you want to teach and you want to, be an ambassador abroad and you want to help people. But I mean, like, it's funny. Like, I think, once you reach a certain point in your travels and in your experiences, sometimes you're just like, what are these guys doing in Washington, D.C.? Like, don't they know what's going on here? Like, I was just there and they're not paying any fucking attention. Like, I don't know if that would be infuriating or whether you'd feel like you were doing good service. Like, I've never really.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I mentioned that I just met this, Colonel Steve Russell, who was in charge of capturing Saddam. And he ended up in politics in a similar kind of avenue accidentally. Like, he kind of didn't even intend to, but won the vote and sat in Congress for 8 years, I think. And, and he got out of it in the end, since he was saved from politics at the end.
Yeah.
But, I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility, but I certainly wouldn't actively pursue it at this point.
There's a very interesting British politician. His name is Rory Stewart.
Okay.
And Rory, he went to Oxford, I think, or maybe Cambridge, one of the posh schools. But then he did something amazing. Is he worked in. So first thing he did, I think, was he was volunteering in Afghanistan. No, he walked across Afghanistan in 2001.
Yes, I've read his book.
Yeah, Places in Between.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic
book.
Fantastic.
Yeah. And then after he walked across Afghanistan in 2001 and wrote about it, and one of the best books I've ever read, shout out to Rory Stewart. Then he went and worked in Iraq for the coalition government and worked in Basra in the south. And he wrote another book called Prince of the Marshes, which was all about like the militias and the people who were trying to rebuild southern Iraq, which was a complete mess.
Oh, damn. Cut the podcast down and go buy that book.
I had a copy of the book. I don't know where it is. I think I donated it. When I left China, I donated all my books to the Shanghai American School because I just didn't want to take everything with me.
Yeah. You just can't lug everything around you anymore.
But Prince of the Marshes is his Iraq book. And then after he did like 4 years in Iraq, then he moved back to the UK and now he's a member of parliament.
Oh, really?
He's in charge of like the foreign affairs division. He's not like working for the State Department or the Foreign Office, but he's in charge of some like subcommittee. Yeah. And I just felt like, anyone who's walked across Afghanistan deserves to at least have a voice in foreign policy in the UK, in Afghanistan, right? And I see, some of the things that you've done and some of the places you've been in a similar vein. Like you have experiences and a voice that people would benefit from. Yeah. And it's just a matter of whether anyone wants to fucking listen.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully everyone out there right now listening to this is like, oh yeah, these people got like stuff to say.
And especially especially like teaching. I mean, especially higher level teaching, like universities and stuff. Especially in North America, like North American professors don't get around as much as they like to tell everyone they do. And they're teaching about, for example, Iraq, pre-war. Yeah. And you were there in October.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is fresh. It's still fresh experience for me, And so, I mean, I agree with you. There is an element to where I think these experiences that I've had do need to be shared in some way, shape, or form. And to me, it's trying to figure out how to package that really, and what's the avenue that I really want to do that. Because it really does you no good to, travel all the world and country count and do all these sorts of things on these experiences if you never share it with anybody else.
And you got to go deep. Yeah. You got to go deep to have like real experiences and real stories. Like, again, like, no one gives a shit about going to a market for 4 hours in Nairobi, but 7 years in Iraq or you know, for me, it was, you know, I did like 60 days in Brazil on a motorcycle traveling through the Amazon. Like I got to live with people in the Amazon and stuff. Like it was really nice and funny. You take your time, you get to meet people, understand the culture.
Yeah, see the daily life, all the, you know, all the ins and outs and the terribles and the goods and highs and lows, everything. And it's what makes traveling so amazing, right? That's what we do
best. Kindred spirits. So look, if there's anyone watching this podcast, where can we learn more about you?
I am all on the internet at Joel David Bond. So Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, my website, joeldavidbond.com. And my book, As Large as Your Spirit, is on Amazon on all their global markets. So,
and the next one coming out is
Between a Rack and a Hard Place, and you're going to have to wait for a release date because I'm not anywhere near done with the draft.
2025.
Hopefully sooner, but we'll see.
2026, 2025 for sure. And yeah, man, thank you so much for swinging by today. It's really enlightening. It's great to talk to someone who's like traveled and seen as much as you have.
Man, yeah, this has been absolutely this has been a delight. I've just so much fun.
If you come back I would love to actually have you back on after you start in Africa. Like if you come back for family or whatever, come back to see your brother in LA, like it'd be really interesting to see how your experience in the Ivory Coast differs, or, you know, how it compares to what you've been through in Iraq. Yeah.
I think it'd be super fun to just like have a new perspective, new corner of the world, and come back and talk more. We'll do the whiskey next time.
Yes, we won't plan this for midday, which is a little bit troublesome.
All right.
So now, look, we can go up to here where we're wide and shake it.
All right, excellent.
Great to meet you, man. Thank you so much for swinging by.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ryan. This has been a delight. So much fun.
Fade to black. Look at that production quality. And we're out.